This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and it's a BOGO review. We got two here. This is the Asus ROG Strix SCAR 2 GL504GW and the GL704GW. Those names are so long, it's already the end of the review, right? All right. So much for marketing names at Asus. Anyway, I've actually always liked the Strix line because it's been a bit more affordable, but it's got your kind of meat and potatoes, the stuff you need for good gaming performance, and they've made it better looking. The lids have gotten more ROG Zephyrus looking, for example, with the brushed aluminum two-tone kind of finished lid on them. But there's been price creep too. The Strixes are now at $19.99 a piece. Doesn't matter which size you buy. The good news is you have a full mobile NVIDIA RTX 2070 card, not the Max Q version, despite the fact that these are both relatively thin and light. Not as thin and light as the ROG Zephyrus models. We just reviewed the 15-inch. We'll be reviewing the 17-inch. But hey, for less money and potentially room for more cooling, a lot easier to upgrade, a totally normal design. I'm kind of more psyched about these than the Zephyrus models. We're going to look at it now. First off, for those of you who like a lot of the features that this laptop has, but a little bit more money than you wanted to spend, Asus has a Strix SCAR, which is what we have here, a SCAR 2 technically. There's also the Hero line, which is a bit less expensive because there's an RTX 2060 instead of a 2070 card. And the interior graphics are a little different. While this one goes with a mix of carbon fiber and sort of faux camouflage, the Hero has kind of like a techno pattern instead of the camouflage pattern. Our units were provided. They are loaners from Computer Upgrade King, CUC USA. So if you're looking for a place to buy them, they can do things like customize the RAM for you, which is something you probably want to do in this case. If you want to get different storage options than what comes with the stock model, they can do that for you. Why do I say that about the RAM? Let's get that out of the way first while we talk about the basic specs of the machine, which are typical of all the gaming laptops in this price range for the most part. This has 16 gigs of DDR4, 2666 megahertz RAM. There are 2 RAM slots. They went with single channel. Maybe they're going to change that at some point because, you know, I have that video about what a difference dual channel versus single channel RAM configurations means, which means 2 8 gig modules instead of 1 16 gig module basically. So yeah, that puts a hurt on both benchmark results and a lot of the frames per second that you're going to see in games. So what I did is I upgraded this one myself and I put a second RAM module in so we would have a dual channel configuration. Inside you have the usual Intel 8th generation, the 8750H 6-core 45-watt CPU that you're going to find in pretty much every gaming laptop and some mobile workstations. Will it be updated to 9th gen when that's available? Of course it will, and there's going to only be a very small performance boost with that for the CPU. It does have NVIDIA Optimus switchable graphics, so you have that NVIDIA RTX 2070 model card with Intel UHD 630 graphics. So helps with battery life if you're not gaming, you're using it unplugged, you're just working in Word or Slack or streaming a movie or something like that. It has both an M.2 SSD slot with a PCIe NVMe SSD, and they're not the fastest we've seen, kind of mid-range speed, and it has a hard drive bay. Now, ours has the carrier only to hold that hard drive in the 504 model, and no carrier even supplied with the 704 model, and no cable with either. So you're going to have to source those from Asus. It connects directly to the motherboard, that low cable. It's not a standard kind of cable. The configuration that we have comes with a 512 gig M.2 SSD and no hard drive installed. So the world's your oyster if you want to put in a 2.5-inch SSD, if you just want to swap out a bigger NVMe SSD, you could do that. And it's really easy to open this. This is one of the reasons why I actually like this better than the more expensive ROG Zephyrus. Unscrew the Phillips head screws on the bottom, pry off the case, which is pretty easy to do. It's a plastic bottom on it, and boom, you've got access to everything on here. The Intel 9560 AC socketed Wi-Fi card, your not very impressive capacity 66 watt-hour battery, regardless of which size of this laptop that you go with. And it's pretty easy to access the heat pipes, the fans, to clean out the fans. If you want to repaste it, you can. Another prop for this is that it doesn't use tripod heat sinks. That means there are 4 screws, one in each corner for your CPU and your GPU for very even application of the heatsink on top of those. There are shared heat pipes here. There's a good number of heat pipes. You can see the design is fairly similar, whether you go with the 15 or the 17-inch. And those shared heat pipes do result in some heat pollution. The GPU runs a little hotter than we're used to seeing actually in this kind of laptop. Usually it's the CPU cores that kind of run hot, not the GPU. It's not alarming temperatures, but seeing, 81 to 85 centigrade, where usually we see 75 centigrade in an RTX 2070 gaming laptop, even a slim one's a little surprising. The core temperatures, yes, like all of these gaming laptops from this generation with the 6-core CPU inside, it will thermal throttle unless you want to go ahead and do some undervolting. Though looking at what Asus has done, and when we look at hardware info, I noticed the voltages are already a little lower than normal, so there wasn't a lot of room for undervolting. Usually 100 millivolt undervolt is easy to do on any laptop in this class. This one we can only get about 50 millivolt undervolting with stability. Asus Armory Crate software is included with all Asus gaming laptops, and it's not bad really, and they have several different fan profiles really, and performance profiles. We use the balanced mode for most of our tests, their balanced mode. It doesn't mean the Windows power plant balanced mode. If you switch to turbo, the fans will get louder and the performance will be a little bit improved. It's not a huge difference, but it's a little bit. It's there for you. And you can play with your GPU settings and all that sort of thing. Like I said, the features on this are actually pretty good. Despite the fact that we see core temperatures in the mid to upper 90s when playing with AAA titles like Far Cry 5, The Witcher 3, that sort of thing, surface temperatures aren't that bad. It's probably because only the lid on these is metal. The keyboard deck and the bottom side are plastic, which they just don't get as hot as metal to the touch. So you really, it's better for the laptop if you don't block the vents. Be careful if you put it on your lap when you're gaming, but it's not a burning hot laptop. So how is actual performance in games and using pro apps, say you're using Adobe Premiere or something like that? Excellent. The performance on this is very good. The frame rates that we see in games, and you can see games running across the screen throughout this review, are exactly where we would expect them to be for a machine with this spec and configuration set, which is pretty good given the fact that, like I said, these are relatively thin and light machines, so not as much room for cooling and all that sort of thing. So even with that thermal throttling going on, they're still maintaining pretty high clock speeds, and the GPU is very performant. And it's a full 120-watt version of that RTX 2070. The keyboard on this, it's zone backlit, not RGB backlit, just like the Zephyrus. I don't know what's up with that because per key RGB backlighting has been a thing for at least a year now, especially when you're talking about a $2,000 laptop. You can also control the front lighting on the front edge of these. They have a little LED bar and the logo on the lid, or you can basically turn those off if you're taking it to work and you don't want to look like a light show. Keyboard has 1.8 millimeters of travel and it feels really nice. There's good actuation force, there's good bounce back, it has N-key rollover. If you're using this for productivity, for typing on it, it's wonderful. It's not bad for gaming either, and even the 15-inch has a number pad. So if you like a number pad, keep that in mind. That's not always a common thing to see on a 15-inch laptop. The trackpad is made by Elan, and it's a MS Precision trackpad, so MS Precision drivers. It's decent. Elan's not my favorite trackpad manufacturer, but it's decent enough. And it's dedicated soft touch clickers, which I prefer over super stiff ones. Ports on this are excellent, which is nice to see. Again, a little bit better than the Zephyrus. You've got HDMI 2.0B. You've got plenty of USB-A ports. Two of them are USB-A Gen 1. One is USB-A Gen 2. And there is a USB-C Gen 2 port, but it is not Thunderbolt 3. And in this price range, that does kind of hurt. And again, it's the same thing with the Zephyrus, which is an even more high-end laptop. I don't know what Asus is doing. They're leaving Thunderbolt 3 out. I know that's going to be a hurt for some of you. We have Gigabit Ethernet on board as well. There's also a mini display port 1.2, and that's the one you're going to want to use if you want high frame rates because HDMI port typically connects to the Intel UHD 630 graphics. And content creators, yeah, there's a full-size SD card slot here, so great story when it comes to the ports. So how about that display? It's the usual trendy 144 Hz display, so that's great if you're playing esports kind of titles where you typically can get really high frame rates like Overwatch or Apex, something like that. Good stuff. 3 millisecond response time, IPS, the usual matte, non-touch, full HD display, high resolution, fast refresh displays just aren't readily available yet. That's why you're not seeing it more often, even though the machine really could probably drive higher resolutions. Not probably, definitely drive higher resolutions, at least 2K easily, even in AAA titles. It's a good display. Again, it's the same one that's used in the more expensive ROG Zephyrus line, whether you're talking about the 15-inch or the 17-inch, made by AU Optronics. The Zephyrus line does get that Pantone validated thing, which means they've calibrated it a bit better. For example, the white point on our 15-inch one was way high and kind of weird, but you can calibrate these, and they're quite good for laptop gaming displays. There's not much light bleed going on here. The color representation is typical near full sRGB coverage. They're nice enough looking displays, and they're good enough for doing some pretty serious editing in Photoshop. I mean, if you're a professional photographer, you probably want a wide gamut display if you're working for print, but for the rest of the world, it's good stuff. So Asus went with those trendy skinny bezels, and that's a great thing on 3 sides. But boy, this has one of the tallest chins at the bottom I've ever seen. It is not a pretty sight. They do this because they need the bottom chassis to be a certain size, so they have to match the top lid to the bottom lid. Well, duh. And as a result of that, they've given you a chin cam. Now, MSI with the Raider GE75, they did manage to find a teeny little webcam to put up top anyway, but Asus just went with one down there. So when you're twitching your jowls. You probably want to clip on higher quality webcam if you're doing something like Twitch streaming. For sound, you have that 3.5mm combo jack that does both headphone and mic, and you have 2 1-watt stereo speakers. And yeah, you know, they're not bad. They're not terrible at all. They're average among gaming laptops. They're decent enough. They don't have a super lot of bass, but they're not tinny and thin. Not as good as the Zephyrus, but that's probably because that one has 2-watt speakers instead, but not bad stuff. And fan noise, it's not bad at all. The fans are really well tuned. These are 12-volt fans, so it's not a roaring loud laptop. Like, you're going to have to put the headphones on just to game and be able to hear the game, even in turbo mode. Now, you can actually adjust the fans yourself manually too, so if you really want to ramp up those fan curves, then you probably do want to use headphones. So how about battery? You know, Asus is still playing that game kind of where they use a smaller capacity battery to reduce the size and the weight of the laptop. 66 watt hour, whether you go with the 15 or the 17-inch model. That's not real big for a 6-core laptop with dedicated graphics like this, but you're using it unplugged, so you're mostly using the Intel integrated graphics. It actually does better than the Zephyrus model. Go figure. Who knows why this is, because battery capacities aren't really that different. But it does about 5 hours with brightness set to 150 nits, a mix of productivity, a little bit of Photoshop, some streaming video, and that sort of stuff. Kind of lightweight, certainly not gaming. To take off the plastic bottom cover, it's really easy. The Phillips head screws are all visible here. There is nothing hidden under this little rubber foot here. So then you just use a guitar pick, pry it off. It's not too hard. Start from the front edge. That makes life a little easier. And the LED light strip stays on the body of the laptop, so do not try to pry that up. That should stay there. So internally, these are almost identical, but not quite, which, well, there you have it. The Wi-Fi card is in a different location on the 2 of these, for example. So we've got our cooling system right here, and this one has 2 heat pipes over here versus 3 heat pipes, so it's a shared heat pipe on the 17-inch model. So slight difference there, though it doesn't, like I said, make the hugest difference in cooling. Both of them have exhaust here, and only single exhaust on this side. RAM slots, 2 of them in the same location on both of these, so you've got potential with 2 32 gig DIMMs to go up to 64 in theory with this, as long as the BIOS is supporting it. I believe that it does. On our smaller model, the Wi-Fi card is located over here, right next to the M.2 SSD. We have a Kingston mid-rangey 512 gig NVMe SSD in ours. On the 17-inch model, the M.2 SSD is in the same location. They've just covered it with some foil tape, and this one for insulation. And the Wi-Fi card is on the opposite side. You'll get an Intel 9560 AC Wi-Fi card regardless of which size laptop you buy, and the same battery in them, and the same hard drive bay location. So this one has 2 RAM modules, not 1, because I added the second one, like I said, for my testing so I could test it in dual channel mode where performance is notably better. So should you get the 15 or the 17-inch model, usually the bigger the chassis, the cooler it runs, and that's one of the selling points. In this case, really the thermal difference in terms of core temperatures and CPU temperatures and surface temperatures wasn't that different. But if you look at these 2 machines together, you can see how compact the 17-inch model is. There really isn't a whole lot of extra volume inside. So don't go running to the 17-inch simply for thermals. But if you want a bigger screen and, you know, it really isn't that much bigger and it's about a pound heavier, not too bad, then I get it. So there you have it, the 15 and 17-inch versions of the Asus ROG Strix Scar 2. GL504 and 704, both of these are GW models, which means Intel 8th generation CPUs and NVIDIA RTX 2070 graphics. And as you can tell, I like them a lot in terms of the fact that it's very easy to open them up, upgrade them, clean them, repaste them, whatever you want to do. You have good, normal keyboards here with the ample key travel, 1.8 millimeters, normal, nice trackpads with Microsoft Precision drivers, made by Elan, but hey, okay. And good displays, the same as on the higher-end Zephyrus models. So yeah, there's a lot to like. The cooling, like so many of these gaming laptops, particularly the, obviously the not chunky desktop replacement ones, is, the core temperatures are pretty high, but not any higher than any of the competition for the most part. The only one that this really directly competes with that does have significantly better cooling is the MSI GE Raider family, the GE75 and the GE63, like I mentioned. Also, those look a little less gamery, well, particularly the 17-inch model. But other than that, they're giving MSI a run for their money here. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and lids up if you like this vid.